City of Silver. Derek Berg had no idea how he got home. All he remembered was the indescribable horror. Dark Regence's character and behavior didn't appear too different from his former self. However, it was true that there was a change to him that was unsettling. Derek was afraid that the City of Silver would be targeted by the evil god, the fallen creator, afraid that the City of Silver would be obliterated before he could become the sun, saving it from its more than 2,000-year-long curse and give hope and sunshine to the residents here. At that moment in time, he hated himself for not being strong enough, that he was still only at sequence 8. No, I can't just watch idly. Derek suddenly stood up, and he prepared to rush to the spire and tell the other elders of the six-member council and Chief Colin Iliad of what he had discovered. However, Derek knew that such anomalies weren't suspicious. Every time they explored the depths of the darkness, the members would have a period of intense tension lasting for days, tens of days, or even more than a month. In addition, the uninhabited desolate plains and the hopeless journey would bring about extreme depression. In addition, in order to be safe, the members of the exploration team wouldn't be allowed to release any sexual urges that had been pent up during their excursions, which caused them to act differently after every exploration. If they ended up with more than half the team ending up dead or injured, a huge change in personality wasn't a rare occurrence. The manner of handling such people could only be dealt with via the usual quarantine and treatment with almost zero exception. The City of Silver had the first 3 sequences of the Dragon Pathway, so there was no lack of psychoanalysis. Derek rushed to the door and suddenly slowed down. He knew that this method of reporting to the 6-member council might not be effective. It would likely arouse suspicion, and there might even be the threat of being targeted by the shepherd, Elder Lovey. After pacing back and forth for more than 10 seconds, Derek gritted his teeth and pulled the door open. He felt that he had to warn the elders of the 6-member council, even if it would be a huge risk for him. For the vast majority of the residents of the City of Silver, sacrificing their lives to maintain the existence of this city and the continuation of this civilization was the belief that was ingrained into their bones. Selfish people often didn't live long in such environments regardless of whether it was outside or inside. Of course, Derek wasn't completely reckless. Under the tutelage of the members of the Tarot Club, especially the Hanged Man, he clearly understood that there were times when one had to be patient, protect himself properly, and avoid unnecessary sacrifices in order to better defend the City of Silver. PLL only talk about the abnormality I observe. It shouldn't be dangerous, Derek consoled himself, running faster and faster. Finally, he saw the spire that represented the highest authority in the City of Silver. He found a Beyonder on duty and made a request to meet with the chief. To Derek's surprise, the Beyonder didn't ask the usual question. After simply passing on the information, he was led up the stairs to the chief's room. Very strange, it's different from before. Derek felt that the changes in the details made him more uneasy. Entering the room, he saw Chief Colin Iliad standing in front of a wall. This tall elder, with his deep blue eyes and messy white hair, had his back facing 2 swords that hung on the wall. He wore his usual flaxen-colored shirt and brown coat, and it was hard to believe that he was an expert who had successfully hunted many devils and monsters. Derek Berg, what matter would actually require you to tell me it face to face? Colin asked in a deep voice. Your Excellency. Derek saluted. I met the team that was sent to explore that temple at the training grounds today. I found that the Dark Regents I know has experienced a strange change. He's no longer as cheerful as he was before, and his smile is as polite as a stranger. Also, Elder Lovia doesn't frequently change the way she speaks like she usually did. Colin looked deeply at Derek and asked in a low voice, just these 2 things. Yes. Derek lowered his head. I think there might be something unusual about that. Colin waved his hand and said, I got it. PLL get Afler to do an investigation. You may return. In the future, you just need to report such matters to the Guardian of the Spire directly. Afler was the City of Silver's most experienced psychoanalyst, who was closest to Sequence 6. It was a pity that there was no potion formula after Sequence 7. After receiving such an answer, Derek left gloomily. Looking at Derek's back as he disappeared by the door, Colin sighed in disappointment. After talking to Dr. Aaron about Will Ossipton's situation for a while, Klein got off the carriage and took the steam metro. After 3 stops, he arrived near Minsk Street and switched to a trackless public carriage to return home. As it was still early, He used divination to confirm that the previous tenant wasn't lying, and then he diligently continued to study the Book of Secrets. Ever since he had obtained this mysterious book, Klein's use of the mysterious space above the gray fog became more and more ingenious as he completed many more outstanding techniques. What limits me now is my own sequence, my own strength and spirituality. Late at night, Klein hid the Book of Secrets and went to the bathroom to wash up, in preparation for bed. That night he slept soundly. Even the church bells in the morning only made him turn over. Winter is the best time to stay in bed, Klein grunted and got up. Reward the hero bandit Dark Emperor. He had a sugared hard-boiled egg and strawberry jam he specially bought to match with white bread. Just as he was enjoying his meal, the doorbell suddenly rang. Didn't I tell Mike to come after breakfast? He took a sip of the sweet soup and wiped his mouth with a napkin. According to his agreement with reporter Mike, he would only arrive half an hour after breakfast before they began interviewing the rescued girls of Eastborough. If Mike didn't appear after half an hour, then it meant that the matter would be delayed by a day. Klein walked to the door, but before he could reach out his hand, the outline of a visitor appeared in his mind. He wasn't reporter Mike Joseph, but Dr. Aaron Seary. Good morning, Aaron. Did you sleep late last night? Klein noticed that Aaron's face was pale, so he quietly activated his spirit vision to take a look. Aaron took off his hat and cane and started to take off his coat, but the cold air in the room stopped. Klein laughed dryly and said, "As you know, I'll be going out today. Mike might come looking for me, so I didn't light up the fireplace." Aaron nodded and didn't say anything else. He followed Klein into the living room, found a seat and sat down. "Sherlock, I had a nightmare last night. I dreamed about that child, Will Ossipton." "Nightmare?" "This is within the limits of my knowledge. I'm a professional when it comes to interpreting dreams, far more professional than deduction." Klein leaned forward, clasped his hands and said, "What kind of nightmare?" Aaron recalled and said, "There are some details and processes that I can't remember. What I remember most is a tall, pitch-black steeple with a huge silver snake coiled around. It was moving slowly, looking at me with its cold, merciless red eye. Don't know why, but I entered the steeple, and I would go up the stairs and at other times down the stairs, going through walls after walls, and one locked door after another. Finally, I found the child called Will Ossipton in a dark corner. He hopped a few steps on one leg and curled up against the wall, with tarot cards scattered everywhere beside him. When he saw me, he was scared and happy. He called out, 'Doctor.' Aaron, the whole dream was roughly like that before I woke up." Klein listened attentively and thought for a while before asking, "Did Will Ossipton say anything else?" Aaron frowned and thought before suddenly saying, "Yes," he said, "Doctor. Aaron, a snake wants to eat me." Following that, a giant silver snake hung down from the ceiling, its head facing me. Its mouth was very big, but it has no teeth, no tongue, and it was completely blood-red. Silver giant snake, a pitch-black steeple, Will Ossipton protected under layers of protection, Klein said to Dr. Aaron in a measured voice. "It's not a very strange dream. It likely has you subconsciously sensing some kind of predicament he was in while you were talking to Will Ossipton, that he was being threatened by something. That's why you dreamed of something like this, a child hiding in the depths of a tall steeple behind countless walls and doors, huge silver snakes coiling around the top of the steeple. Heh heh. As a detective, we know a little bit of psychology. It's also often talked about in the newspaper. What I don't understand is why you didn't have such a dream until today." Klein didn't lie about his interpretation, but he didn't reveal the possible true reasons behind it. Aaron opened his mouth and said, "I was in too much of a hurry just now and forgot to mention something." As he spoke, he took out a leather wallet and took out a fairly exquisitely folded paper crane. After realizing that Will Ossipton and his family had moved away, I remembered that he had given me this before he left the hospital, saying, "Doctor, this will bring you good luck." T didn't pay much attention to it at the time, and casually threw it into the office drawer. After parting with you last night, I went to retrieve it and put it in my wallet. As a result, I had a nightmare that very night." Klein looked at the paper crane, nodded thoughtfully and said, "Dr. Aaron, it looks like Will Ossipton didn't deliberately bring you bad luck. He had made up for it later. The paper crane invented by Emperor Roselle is meant to act as symbolism for wishing you well. Besides, he said it would bring you good luck." Aaron subconsciously asked, "Origami was invented by Emperor Roselle." "I don't know if it's him, but I think it's likely him," Klein smiled. "Probably." Spirit world Aaron was relieved by Klein's explanation and reassurance, and he prepared to observe for a few more days to see if there were any more nightmares such as this. After sending the famous surgeon out of the door with a smile, Klein's expression suddenly became solemn, as if he was thinking about something. There was no problem with his interpretation of the dream. The pitch-black steeple, the walls and doors that blocked his path, and the giant silver snake, they all symbolized that Will Ossipton was in a situation where he was threatened by something that symbolized the child's fear and helplessness, as well as his attempts to hide behind layers of protection. But the problem was that this was unlikely to be a revelation Dr. Aaron's spirituality had received on its own. Otherwise, he wouldn't have had such a dream only until last night, or when he found the paper crane. A similar development should have taken place long before Will Ossipton was discharged, back when his spirituality unconsciously became aware of the particularly strange developments, allowing him to have similar experiences as he had now. Therefore, Klein suspected that the medium which instilled the dream into Dr. Aaron was the paper crane. Klein activated his spirit vision to carefully observe this handicraft, but he didn't find any spiritual brilliance. However, his spiritual perception and intuition told him that there was something strange about this piece of origami. Certain magical aspects that might involve the most illusory, most difficult to comprehend, and most worthy of fear and reverence, fate. That child called Will Ossipton isn't simple. It seems like the most amazing thing wasn't the tarot card, but rather he himself. The giant silver snake is a symbol of danger, and this matter is related to bad luck, good luck, and other elements. Could it be that it represents the snake of Mercury, sequence one of the monster pathway? Klein's thoughts wandered, but he couldn't be certain of anything. He turned to question the problem of how the dream was instilled. With Klein's accomplishments in mysticism, this wasn't something that was too complicated or difficult to understand. He quickly came up with an idea. The first thing to do was to rule out the influence of specters and wraiths, which would have stained Dr. Aaron's aura with a blackish-green color of varying degrees, and I didn't see any sign of that just now. There are two main ways of instilling information, without causing the owner of the dream to appear abnormal. One of them is using the beyonder powers of a nightmare like captain. An objective is met through guidance, and it wouldn't involve the culprit, otherwise, traces would similarly be left behind. The second method would be even more ingenious and advanced. The principle of a dreamland is that of astral projections traveling through the spirit world, and the details that one would normally unwittingly notice, under external stimulation, would turn into a symbolic revelation. Or they can obtain some enlightenment directly related to themselves from external sources. Then their spirit bodies and psyche would be informed of this, and because the owner of the body was in a state of sleep, this will appear in the form of a dream. So the second way is to instill it into the spirit world. First, use some magical method to create the revelation that one will need, and then naturally let the target's astral projection obtain and feed back the information while roaming the spirit world. That way, the target will be able to dream of the scene that others would want them to dream of, and there will be no superficial traces. This is something that I'm currently unable to do, even if it's a spirit body that's able to partially wield some of the power above the gray fog. Klein paused for a moment, and then added another possibility. A seed was planted in Dr. Aaron's subconscious through the paper crane, and once he found it, he would have the corresponding dream. That's easy to confirm. As long as I use mediumship on Dr. Aaron, I should be able to find traces of it. However, would it be unfriendly to use mediumship on him? Or should I borrow the mental terror candle from Father Atravsky? No, the one who recognized me was that vampire, the zealous figurine lover, Emlyn White, not the muscular, giant-like Father Atravsky. Klein reined in his thoughts and considered his subsequent action. He decided that he would wait until he went above the gray fog to divine the level of danger. If it was an acceptable level, he would sneak into Dr. Aaron's house tonight, use the dream charm and other methods to secretly observe him, and see if the source of the dreamland was a result of direct guidance or an indirect fabrication. However, with Klein's strength and level, it would be difficult to find traces of the latter. Even he himself didn't have much confidence. This didn't mean that his astral projection could travel the same spirit world as Dr. Aaron's astral projection by sitting next to him and entering cogitation. This required a sufficient amount of locking on to do so. According to the descriptions in the Book of Secrets, the existence of the spirit world was quite magical. It completely overlapped with the real world, so everyone could obtain revelations from the spirit world at any time. However, the spirit world didn't distinguish between directions, and the past, present, or future could even intersect there. It was like infinite knowledge, information, and illusions were spiritually gathered and compressed into a strange sea. It was different from the world, as one would imagine according to usual concepts or logic. As a result of this, the revelations that one received from the spirit world could only be a variety of symbols, not direct answers. And precisely because of this, every astral projection's experience of traveling in the spirit world was not only related to their physical location and time, but it was also dependent on the current state of their body and the mind. Without locking on to the corresponding location, it made it impossible to lock onto and find a person's astral projection in the spirit world, even if one was physically next to them. This was also the reason why the astral projection's movement in the spirit world was limited, and one doesn't dare to venture too deep. Once it got lost and was unable to return to its body, its owner would become a retard and, even more seriously, a vegetable. It was even more difficult to use the spirit world as a springboard for transference. If one wasn't careful, then they would lose their way and never be able to return to the real world until they rot to death. Klein exhaled, temporarily throwing the question to the back of his mind. He took out his pocket watch and looked at the time. He realized that he had been thinking too long, that his breakfast had already turned completely cold, and that the fact that reporter Mike hadn't arrived yet meant that the commission was likely to be delayed by a day. In the spirit of not wasting anything, Klein finished the rest of his meal and then went above the gray fog to make a divination. He was surprised to find that there were no revelations indicating danger at all. After doing all of this, the appointed time had passed. Without any hesitation, he changed into a heavy jacket, put on his cap, grabbed the vocabulary book, and left 15 Mince Street. His initial plan was to accompany Mike Joseph to East Borough for an interview and find an opportunity to hint at old Kohler, to not mention his promise of helping Liv find her daughter. As for Liv's family, he let old Kohler do the reminding. And now, after Mike had pushed back the interview by a day, Klein was even more at ease, no longer worried about any mishaps or mistakes. With the address mentioned by old Kohler, and according to the revelation from divination, Klein entered the depths of East Borough, and under the watchful, wary, numb, or greedy gaze of the crowds, he found the room on the 3rd floor. There were 2 bunk beds here, and there were also some old and worn bedding on the floor. Every empty space was filled with sundry. Klein looked directly at the bottom bunk of the innermost bunk and called out, "Old Kohler." With a swoosh, old Kohler sat up and leaned towards the door in pleasant surprise. "You really came. After sending you that letter yesterday, I already guessed that you would come looking for me today, so I didn't go to the dock. I've been waiting at home all this time. Well, I don't have to think about how to fabricate the lie about why I came straight here to find you." Klein looked around and said, "Old Kohler, with your current income, you can definitely rent a better room and move to a better place. Why did you only change your bed from the floor to bunk bed? Most of the money is for gathering information for you." Old Kohler laughed. "And I'm no longer young. I need to save some money for the future when my future health wanes." Klein was silent for 2 seconds before saying, "You can consider buying some insurance, such as a single elder aid policy. They can give you the money that can at least fill your stomach, and a room for you to sleep in every week when you're really old." The insurance industry of this world had sprouted in the 4th epoch. After being promoted by Emperor Roselle, it had matured quite a bit. There were various kinds of insurance, such as the various insurances for maritime trade, fire insurance, injury insurance, long-term care insurance in different names, and so on. They were mostly targeted at the rich and the middle class. No. When I was a worker, I paid a premium of 3 pence a week, but after I lost my income," old Kohler sighed. His biggest problem now was that his income was unstable, and he wondered when the money he received from the detective would be cut off. Klein couldn't promise anything either. He pointed outside and said, "Let's go to Liv's house and return the vocabulary book to the girl." After leaving the room, Klein casually mentioned, "What a joke. I was talking about doing volunteer work the day before yesterday and volunteered to help find Daisy, but she ended up being sent back by the police yesterday. Please don't mention it again. I don't want to be laughed at." "All right." Old Kohler agreed first, then he said, "No one will laugh at your kindness." After walking through the dirty streets, they arrived at Liv's house. Klein saw that the girl who had just been rescued had started ironing again, and he saw that the clothes here were hanging down and dripping with water. It was just as it was before. He was momentarily at a loss as to what to say. "Daisy." After a while he said, "Your vocabulary book." Daisy's eyes lit up, but she was too busy to leave. After busying herself for quite a while, she stopped working and went to the door, thanking him profusely. After Liv and Freja had also put down their work and come over to express their gratitude, Klein repeated what he had just said to old Kohler. After receiving positive responses, he took out the £2 worth of change that he had prepared and handed it to Liv. "There will be a reporter coming to interview Daisy tomorrow. This is the advance of the payment he's giving, but don't mention it in front of him, otherwise things will become complicated. Heh, maybe he will give more tomorrow, but not that much. No, I'm willing to expose that bad guy's evil deeds. I don't want money." Daisy shook her head. Klein let out a soft chuckle. "This is a rule. You can't break rules, understand?" He looked at Liv and said, "Take it. Your belief is right. It's only if Daisy and Freja learn more words and learn more things will you all escape from this situation." He was going to suggest that Liv's family should move to the edge of Eastborough. Customers who could afford to hire others to do their laundry wouldn't live in Eastborough, but in the end, he didn't mention it. He had intended to provide them with more help, but he restrained himself. There were thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people like Liv and her family in Eastborough. Even if one was a wealthy banker who wanted to help them, they wouldn't be able to make a splash. Besides, this was just Eastborough. There was still the entire Backland and the Lone Kingdom. "Thank you, and help me thank the reporter for me." Liv was silent for a moment, then she took the money. Klein didn't stay for long. He quickly left as if there was a ghost that would devour his soul. After walking outside with old Kohler, he turned around and suddenly sighed. He said in a low voice, "There has never been a savior." "Dreamland what?" Old Kohler asked, not hearing him clearly. Klein looked at the potholed road in front of him and said in a self-deprecating manner, "Nothing. Hope Liv's family can get out of this situation and live in better condition." He had indeed voiced out his thoughts. Being one of the inheritors of the Foodaholic Empire's new era, it was perfectly normal for him to think of a revolution, to mobilize the masses, and to change the world. However, when he thought about the details, he felt that he couldn't save himself just by relying on the poor. This was because Beyonder forces existed in this world. Furthermore, they were relatively supernatural and couldn't be resolved simply by firearm. For instance, Sequence 5 of the mutant pathway. That was just one aspect of things. Another aspect of things was due to the law of Beyonder characteristics conservation. Due to the limited access to ingredients, Beyonder forces couldn't become commonplace, making it difficult to convert the advantage of numbers into effective combat power. Even if it could be spread, as long as the problem of losing control wasn't resolved, then it would still bring about disaster. If there weren't any high-sequence Beyonders, then there would actually be ways to deal with all of this to a certain extent. However, in the real world, not only were there demigods, but there were also sealed artifacts that could kill people without them even knowing how they died. Besides, deities were real and they stood high and lofty. In this way, the poor would use strikes and street protests to fight back. However, once they took up weapons and established an army, they would be met with an unstoppable counterattack. It wasn't impossible for a large-scale natural disaster to occur, one that would affect people psychologically. The only ones that were on par with the official Beyonder organizations were mostly secret organizations. Typically, they were related to evil forces, so by joining hands with them, death might not even be the most tragic ending. Therefore, to embark on the path of revolution, the most hopeful road to success was to get the support of one or more churches. How many concessions could be obtained through simple strikes and street protests, while still meeting the vested interests of those involved? Bribery would be much easier, however. The incident regarding the true creator, who almost made use of the miserable situations of the poor to descend upon Backland, has seemed to stir the church of the Evernight goddess and the nobles who were aware of the situation. I can see that from the investigation mission that Mike had accepted and the information provided by Miss Justice. Klein's thoughts lingered on Eastborough, the dock area, and the factory district. In the end, he couldn't help but let out a laugh and sigh in his heart. After all the ideas that come to me, It seems that only through the threat of an evil god's descent can the poor situation be improved. However, the evil gods are also the ones who can't wait to draw on their flesh and blood, existences that devour their souls. They're the ones most likely to bring a disaster that no one can escape from. What wonderful irony! In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Count Hall. As Dr. Escalante had upcoming matters she had to attend to, Audrey had brought forward her second psychology lesson for the week. Susie, more excited than she was, had long rushed into the study, even leaving the ball game she usually loved the most aside. Audrey purposely displayed her curiosity during this lesson, occasionally asking Escalante about psychology related to mysticism. At the end of the lesson, Escalante finally spoke after some deliberation. "Miss Audrey, we've organized a seminar on this subject. Many members have specialized in the intersecting field of psychology and mysticism. Are you interested in joining?" "Of course." Audrey nodded and answered without the slightest sign of hesitation. It perfectly matched her predetermined, innocent, and curious personality that she had set for herself. Escalante smiled. "Remember to keep this a secret. You know that your elders have a strong prejudice against the study of mysticism. I'll bring you there for the next lesson." "No problem." Audrey gave her consent with a hint of excitement. After sending off Escalante, whose hair reached her waist, out the study, she closed the door behind her, faced the mirror by the bookcase, and remained silent for 2 seconds. Following that, she lifted up her skirt and took a step and did a swirl from a court dance. Then, looking at herself in the mirror, she sweetly smiled and said, "Audrey, you're great." Audrey knew that she had taken the first step in entering the psychology alchemy. Although the seminar was most likely an outer circle, and there would definitely be a lot of tests to follow, this really made her open the door to the psychology alchemy. In the process, she didn't borrow strength from the outside world, but instead, she relied solely on her observation and performance to perfectly hide it from psychiatrist Dr. Escalante. Therefore, she was very proud of herself. "That seminar sounds interesting." Susie leaned over and wagged her tail. "Audrey, can I join?" "Join?" Looking at this golden retriever with its wicked round eyes, Audrey immediately sank into deep thought. She dragged out a terse acknowledgement. "T can't do it at the moment, Susie." "Why, you're too conspicuous." At this point, she changed the topic of their conversation and said with a slight smile, "But I can bring you along." On Saturday night, taking his master key and his black cane, Klein walked out of 15 Mince Street. Without the latter, he didn't think that he would be able to return today. He was going to find Dr. Aaron, enter his dream, and find out how the nightmare regarding Will Ossipton came about. As for where Dr. Aaron lived, he had already found out yesterday, 3 Birmingham Road, Hillston Borough. By the time Klein arrived, it was past 11 o'clock and the neighborhood was dark and silent. After tossing a coin and performing a divination, Klein passed through the outer bars, walked around to the side, and used the master key to open up an invisible passage through the wall into the dark corridor. With his agile steps, he quietly went up to the 2nd floor and hid in an empty guest room. When it was clear that Dr. Aaron and his wife were asleep, Klein entered their bedroom through the wall. The first thing he did was take out a slumber charm and mutter the incantation, making Dr. Aaron's wife really fall asleep, preventing her from suddenly waking up and disturb what he would subsequently do to her husband. Then Klein sat down on a chair in front of the dresser, held the dream charm in his hand, and whispered a word in ancient Hermes, crimson. As soon as he finished saying that, he felt the charm in his palm become light, as though it had become a weightless illusion. As his spirituality poured in, a transparent flame wrapped around the charm, burning a deep and serene black. Driven by Klein's will, the blackness spread out, enveloping both Dr. Aaron and himself. Klein quickly entered a cogitation state and saw the endless darkness and the single oval-shaped light. His spirituality extended out and touched that illusory and hazy object. The world around him suddenly turned upside down and twisted, and Klein found himself on a barren plain, with pitch-black stones at his feet and not even a blade of grass. In the center of the plain stood a black steeple with a huge silver snake coiled around. It had its head reared up, and its red eyes stared coldly in their direction. Unlike what Dr. Aaron had described, the silver serpent had no physical scales, and its body was covered in dense patterns and symbols. They were all connected to each other into what seemed like wheels, and there were different symbols around each wheel. The giant snake's tail and head's wheels were each halved, looking incongruous, as though they could kill a person with obsessive-compulsive disorder, But Klein imagined that if the giant silver snake could bite its own tail with its mouth, the wheel would be complete. It wouldn't be disconnected, and there wouldn't be any more changes. Next to Klein, Dr. Aaron stared blankly ahead, moving closer and closer to the dark steeple. I can now confirm that no one is guiding Dr. Aaron. That excludes Nightmare Beyonder powers. Klein quickly made a judgment. He didn't stop Dr. Aaron, but he followed him towards the black steeple and the silver snake. The two of them had only taken a few steps when their target had already appeared before them. The giant silver snake had its upper body bent down, as though it was considering how to enjoy the dessert that was delivered to its mouth. Its mouth opened wide, but there was no putrid smell coming from it. Its red eyes were cold and merciless, looking at everything like they were nothing more than prey, yet it didn't have the slightest hint of bloodlust or cruelty. In front of it, everything seemed puny and equal because of their insignificance. In the end, the serpent didn't launch an attack. Klein followed Dr. Aaron through an old, rotting wooden door and into the darkness of the tower. As Aaron had told him, the layout was abnormally confusing and chaotic. The stairs spiraled up and down, and the halls, libraries, and rooms were normal, inverted, and some were embedded in other parts. It was a building that couldn't possibly exist in the real world. After passing through the doors and walls, Klein had no idea where he was in the Black Tower. Perhaps he had reached the top, or perhaps the basement. In the rich darkness, he suddenly noticed a figure curled up in the corner in front of him. The figure, sensing Dr. Aaron's approach, scrambled to its feet, hopping over on one leg. It was only when the figure was very close did Klein clearly see him. He looked dignified and strong in his early teens, and had an expression of obvious fear. The figure was about 1.4 meters tall, and his left calf was missing. It was obvious that he was the child who had undergone surgery, Will Ossipton. In his hand was a deck of tarot cards. His pitch-black eyes were filled with surprise and joy, as well as fear and horror. "Dr. Aaron, a snake wants to eat me." Suddenly, he let out a blood-curdling scream as the image of a huge, mysterious silver snake was reflected in his eye. Whoosh! The tarot cards in his hand fell to the ground, leaving only one card tightly gripped in his palm. Klein focused his gaze over it and saw that there was, similarly, a wheel on the card. It was the Wheel of Fortune card. Whoosh! The dream shattered instantly, and Klein found himself still sitting in a chair in front of the dresser. The crimson moon outside the window was obscured by the clouds. Its moonlight that penetrated through the curtain barely outlined the large objects in the bedroom. The darkness and intensity became the main theme of the room. Klein sat in such an environment and was in no hurry to leave. He looked at the sleeping Dr. Aaron and began to analyze the images he had seen in the dream. Will Ossipton eventually held the Wheel of Fortune card in his hand. And in such a dream, everything symbolizes something. It's a revelation obtained by one's astral projection. In other words, Will Ossipton's matter is related to fate. Furthermore, that giant silver snake might very well represent the snake of Mercury. This child might actually be related to a high-sequence Beyonder, be of the monster pathway, or some strange sealed artifact. Does his danger stem from the snake of Mercury, or the result of greed due to the strange sealed artifact? But the snake of Mercury is sequence 1. It's an existence closest to that of a god. Just its name on its own is an embodiment of his high level. It's impossible that he can't do anything to a child like Will Ossipton. That Ammon, who is of an unknown sequence number, perhaps sequence 1, 2, or 3, could even invade the space above the gray fog with just an avatar. This matter doesn't seem to be that simple. There must be a huge secret behind his matter. At this thought, Klein had already decided to pull back completely. It's obviously a very dangerous matter. Furthermore, the tarot card might not be a mystical item. What's special might very well be Will Ossipton himself. Yes, apart from having nightmares, Dr. Aaron's troubles are already settled. There's no reason for me to get involved in it. Proactively act on this and challenge the impossible is nearly identical to suicide. Yes, I must follow what my heart tells me. Klein pushed the surface of the dressing table with his black-gloved right hand and slowly stood up. Having just entered the dream, he was completely convinced that Dr. Aaron's nightmare came from a revelation that his astral projection had received in the spirit world. And that revelation had been deliberately created and provided by a high-level existence. The paper crane was just a tool for locating him. According to a chapter in the Book of Secrets, Klein could also try to use the paper crane to find Dr. Aaron's astral projection in the spirit world and observe the source of the revelation, but he had already decided to not get involved. Stretching his body, Klein flipped through Dr. Aaron's leather wallet with the last of his curiosity, and he took out the paper crane. He placed the paper crane on the tip of his cane, and he held them simultaneously. Then his eyes turned deep as he softly muttered to himself, "Will Ossipton's current location?" After the divination sentence was repeated 7 times, a breeze suddenly blew in the room, bringing with it a cool feeling as if it were blowing on one's soul. Klein let go of his right palm, and the cane stood firm before falling down with the paper cranes, pointing diagonally at the bed. There, Klein frowned and moved to another position. He repeated the divination and successfully received his feedback. And the intersection point of the 2 divinations was Dr. Aaron. Well, Ossipton's position overlaps with that of Dr. Aaron. That's interesting, Klein said to himself, amused and amazed. His curiosity was piqued to the extreme. Although he didn't intend to get involved in this matter, he wanted to know why there was an overlapping situation such as this. Why don't I bring the paper crane above the gray fog for divination? With the gray fog's obstruction, there won't be any accidents. Klein quickly came up with a new idea. Since it wasn't convenient for him to summon himself in Dr. Aaron's bedroom, he decided to take the paper crane home first. He had actually long prepared for this. Before coming, Klein couldn't confirm the seriousness of the matter, and he had hoped to find Will Ossipton, seeing if he had the opportunity to obtain the tarot card. Therefore, he had prepared another paper crane to replace the real one. It made it easier for him to do all sorts of divination, and he could switch it back once the problem was resolved. As soon as he thought of it, Klein took out the paper crane he had prepared. He had deliberately folded it above the gray fog, just in case Dr. Aaron had suddenly decided to hand over anything related to Will Ossipton to the Church of the Evernight Goddess, allowing his counterfeit to be divine. Taking into account the overall picture, and the details would make things much easier, Klein praised himself. With the help of the faint moonlight, he carefully compared Will Ossipton's paper crane and his, to see if there were any clear differences. Upon comparing them, Klein immediately fell silent. His handicraft skills weren't even comparable to a child's. In fact, they're all paper cranes, so there isn't much of a difference. Mine is only a little cruder. As long as Aaron hadn't studied the original one carefully, then he wouldn't be able to tell that it has been swapped. Klein muttered silently to himself, took out a coin, and used divination to make a final confirmation. After receiving a revelation that confirmed this, he put his paper crane back into Aaron's wallet and returned it to its original position. He then took care of the scene, bringing Will Ossipton's paper crane along with him and left 3 Birmingham Road. With the help of the dowsing rod, Klein successfully returned home. While he was taking a bath, he summoned himself and brought the paper crane along with the master key above the gray fog. Sitting in the quiet and empty palace hall, he picked up the paper crane and carefully examined it for a few seconds, but he didn't discover anything abnormal. Then with a pen and paper, Klein wrote the same divination sentence as before, Will Ossipton's current location. This time, he switched to using dream divination, and he was pleasantly surprised to see an image appear in the world of the gray fog. It was a dark room. A strong and dignified Will Ossipton leaned against the desk with the help of a chair by the window, and he looked out at the scenery with his pitch-black eye. He held a stack of tarot cards in each hand, and beside them there was a pile of wooden blocks. The wooden blocks formed a ring-shaped snake that connected itself from head to tail. The scene outside the window was just as dark, and there was the faint sound of flowing water. The dream ended here without a sound. Klein opened his eyes, tapped the edge of the long bronze table with his finger, and he said to himself, that Ouroboros-like snake is indeed the snake of Mercury. That means it's the snake of Mercury which represents fate. There was the sound of running water outside the window. Does that mean that Will Ossipton's current position is close to the Tussock River? Previously, when I divined his position, was the overlap with Dr. Aaron caused due to interference by fate? Seeing that divination above the gray fog could only receive a revelation of this degree, Klein was no longer troubled by curiosity. He barely interpreted the situation and planned to exchange the paper crane tomorrow night. He would then find an opportunity to guide Dr. Aaron and have him go to the Church of the Evernight Goddess to tell the bishop about this matter. It's best to leave such matters to the officials. Klein let out a chuckle and returned to the real world. After taking a leisurely bath, He didn't get busy and crawled into bed. After an unknown period of time, Klein suddenly realized that he was clearly dreaming. He was in the living room, reading the Book of Secrets. This familiar feeling. He turned his head to look at the door like he usually did. The door creaked open, and a figure in a gray coat walked in. He was about 30 years old, with a long, thin face with a broad forehead and dark blue eyes that looked intelligent. "It's not the captain." Klein suddenly gave a self-deprecating laugh, let out a silent breath, and turned the Book of Secrets in his hand into a copy of Ladies' Aesthetic. He flipped through the magazine, casually greeting the newcomer. The man in the gray coat took off his hat and sat down across him, seemingly casually asking him, "Aaron came to see you this morning." "It really is a nighthawk, a nightmare." Klein resisted the urge to sigh and replied with a smile, "Yes." He had already figured out why the nighthawk had suddenly entered his dream. The nightmare in front of him was likely the captain of the Nighthawks team responsible for the matter regarding Will Ossipton, but they had yet to find any useful clues up to date. In this case, Dr. Aaron and Detective Sherlock Moriarty's act of visiting to ask about Will Ossipton's whereabouts must have been made known to them last night or this morning. At the same time, they discovered that Dr. Aaron rushed over to Mince Street, shortly after he finished his breakfast, to visit Detective Sherlock Moriarty. In the spirit of professionalism, entering a person's dream at night was the most natural and normal development. As for Dr. Aaron, his situation was rather sensitive, so rashly entering a dream might cut off clues, so there was no doubt that a certain detective became the first choice. "What did he encounter?" the captain of the Nighthawks team asked casually. Klein answered honestly, "He had a nightmare." Klein described the pitch-black tower, the giant silver snake, and Will Ossipton under layers of protection and other scenes. Finally, he said, before this nightmare, Aaron had gone to Will Ossipton's place to find the child, partially because he was worried about his health, but also because he was puzzled over his bad luck. Unfortunately, the Ossipton family had moved away. However, Aaron recalled that the boy had given him a paper crane that the boy had folded himself and had wished him luck. Perhaps agitated by these two events, he had such a nightmare. The man in the gray coat looked pleasantly surprised. "Paper crane?" "Yes." Klein nodded slightly. The child gave it to Aaron before he was discharged, and Aaron threw it into his office drawer. He forgot about it until last night. "T understand. Thank you for your explanation." The captain of the Nighthawks team stood up and bowed with his hand against his chest in a very polite manner. Suddenly, there was a ripple in the dreamland, and he disappeared from the room. Looking at the position where he had sat, Klein deduced what would happen next. The Nighthawks might go to Dr. Aaron's tonight and enter his dream for investigations and take the paper crane away. However, a question arose. The paper crane was folded by Klein, and the real thing was above the gray fog. Forget it. Regardless of which paper crane they use, they'll never be able to divine the answer. "It doesn't matter if I switch it back or not," Klein said to himself. He gathered his thoughts and continued to sit there. He wasn't in a hurry to leave the dreamland, and he stared blankly for a long time. After a while, the corners of his mouth curled up as he softly sighed. How nostalgic. On Sunday morning, shortly after Klein finished his breakfast, he heard the doorbell ring as he had expected. But to his surprise, it wasn't just reporter Mike Joseph. Dr. Aaron was with him as well. "Sherlock, I had that nightmare again last night. I don't think it's normal." Aaron didn't keep matters a secret even with Mike around, revealing it the moment he entered the living room. Without waiting for Klein's reply, he took out his wallet and took out a paper crane. "Do you think this is the problem? Ever since I found it and started to carry it with me, I've been having nightmares." Klein nonchalantly glanced at it when his expression froze suddenly. If he hadn't been a clown in the past and had great control over his facial muscles, then he might have revealed an undisguised smile in front of the reporter and doctor. "Yes, a smile. This paper crane is even uglier than the one I made." This was the first thought that came to Klein's mind. At that moment, he had the urge to cover his face and sigh. Could having poor handicraft skills be a tradition of the Nighthawks? There was no doubt that the paper crane in front of him was the result of another switch. After receiving accurate information from Klein, the Nighthawks had seemingly sneaked into Dr. Aaron's bedroom without any delay and switched their folded paper crane for the one in his wallet. But what they didn't expect was that the one in the wallet was also a fake. It was folded by Klein above the gray fog and appeared rather crude. I feel an inexplicable sense of joy. Klein glanced at Dr. Aaron, who didn't notice it, cleared his throat and said, perhaps. I suggest that you go to the cathedral again and talk to the bishop you previously talked to. We need to believe that the gods that we believe in are always watching over us. As he spoke, he drew a triangular sacred emblem on his chest. After the nightmare had left last night, Klein had specifically gone above the gray fog to divine if it was dangerous having switched the paper crane. The result was that it was very safe. Thus, he was now able to make this suggestion with great interest, in an attempt to tease his former colleague. I wonder how they would feel seeing the paper crane that they didn't fold very well returned to them. Klein placated Dr. Aaron in all seriousness and turned to the reporter and said with a smile, Mike, to tell the truth, what I really want to advise Aaron to do is to go see a psychiatrist, but faith can certainly soothe his soul. You're not being frank at all. Mike laughed. All right, let's go. The next day, Klein accompanied the Daily Observer reporter into East Borough to interview the rescued girls. With a full £1 as payment for the interview, no one refused it, not even some of the abused girls. In this interview, Capham's sin was the main focus. The current situation of the girls was another main focus. The former made people angry, while the latter left people feeling heavy. Daisy was actually lucky enough to be able to return to work when she got home and use her labor to barter for food. Less than a third of those who were rescued were like her, and most of them were the kinds with some savings at home, and they were in a position that allowed the traumatized women to heal and have time before they sought out suitable jobs. As for the other two-thirds of those rescued, they had to continue working hard in order to survive. And in the face of the mass unemployment of textile workers, they were often only able to find temporary jobs with low wages. Those with parents and siblings who hadn't lost their jobs were still okay. At least, they were able to help each other, barely filling their stomachs. The families in less optimistic situations had already begun to walk the path of street girls, as though they had never been rescued. Their act of betraying their bodies once was perhaps only for some food. This caused Mike to turn silent like before, and it was only when it was dark and once he left East Borough before his spirit returned. He thanked Klein. Sherlock, it's all thanks to you. Otherwise, I definitely would have been blackmailed today by those rogue gangsters. Tia sent that why you hired me. Klein smiled politely, without any complacency. With old Kohler informing them beforehand, old Kohler and Liv's family hadn't revealed that he had helped search for Daisy for free. Especially when Daisy, who was pretty smart, was asked if she knew any relatively special people, she answered directly, Mr. Reporter and Mr. Detective. Mike nodded sluggishly and walked on in silence for a long time. Before he boarded the carriage, he suddenly let out a sigh. T would like to make a call in this report for the government to use Capham's estate to set up a bursary fund, which will use the annual income to help the rescued girls and others who have been harmed by Capham to get them out of their predicament. Although Capham's safe had already been robbed clean by the hero bandit, his greatest wealth is the property he bought. These should have all been obtained illegally. Klein listened carefully, gave Mike a deep look, and said in sincere praise, You're the best reporter I've ever met. There are plenty of reporters like me. There are always idealists in the world. Mike sighed. With that, he paid £10 to Klein and took off his hat and waved. As he watched the reporter get into the rental carriage, Klein was about to take a public carriage in the other direction when Mike suddenly opened the window and asked with a jibing smile, Sherlock, I'm not the only reporter you know, am I? Klein was stunned for a moment, then he laughed. Guess. City of Silver. Like a trapped beast, Derek Berg paced around the room in anxiety. He felt that the chief wasn't paying enough attention to his report. He was worried that the exploration team members, who had been affected by the fallen creator to an unknown extent, would cause devastating damage to this city that had lasted for 2,582 years in the darkness after their quarantine. In such a situation, he was eager to obtain advice from Mr. Hanged Man, Miss Justice, and company, who were rather familiar with the fallen creator. This was the tarot gathering he anticipated the most. Wait a little while longer, just wait a little longer. If Mr. Fool doesn't summon me, I will pray directly to him. Derek tried to calm himself down, but his pacing didn't slow down one bit. Suddenly, he saw the endless gray fog and heard the messianic voice say, Prepare for the gathering. With a sigh of relief, Derek sat down on the edge of the bed carefully and lay down, pretending to be ready to sleep due to exhaustion. After silently counting 1,000 rapid heartbeats, he waited for a while before he was engulfed by the illusory dark red light. At that moment, Derek's room was abnormally quiet. Lightning streaked across the sky outside his window, keeping the darkness away from the lamp. Suddenly, by the corner of his bed, a black figure squirmed and extended, taking the shape of a human. The dark figure quickly grew tall and quietly looked down at Derek. He carefully observed him for nearly a minute, then withdrew without gleaning anything. In the corner, the shadows remained the same, unchanging. The endless gray fog lingered beneath his feet as usual. The long bronze table in front of him was mottled with green rust, but it didn't seem to be rotten at all. First things that Derek saw were Miss Justice and Miss Magician sitting opposite him. A familiar, jovial greeting sounded in his ear. "Good afternoon, Mr. Fool Tilda, good afternoon." Klein, shrouded in gray fog, nodded slightly. He seemed to respond leisurely to Miss Justice and the other members' greetings, but in reality, he was busy manipulating the world, making him appear like a real person. After yesterday's interviews with reporter Mike, it was already dinner time. Klein went to a restaurant that served Fainapotter cuisine, and he was so overwhelmed by the spiciness that he voluntarily ordered a cup of desert beer. After eating his fill and returning home, he didn't go out again for the rest of the day. Neither did he study the Book of Secrets or prepare his own food. That eased the heavy emotions he felt whenever he went to Eastborough. Without realizing it, the afternoon had arrived, and his thoughts shifted to the tarot gathering. After the greetings, Justice, Audrey, restrained her curiosity and excitement, and she was in no hurry to inquire about the truth behind the Capim incident. Mr. Fool might not answer, but how would I know if he wishes to answer if I don't ask? Well, I hope he makes a request of equal value, and I'll do my best to fulfill it. Audrey looked around at the other members and observed the states of the other members. As a telepathist, she very quickly discovered something strange. The son appears very anxious. Did something happen to the previous exploration team captain? Did he encounter Ammon? In addition, Fours is in an indecisive state of wanting to ask but not daring to. She must have seen the papers and guessed from the tarot cards that our tarot club was involved in Capim's death. But she's curious who the Emperor card represents. She seems to be even more in awe of Mr. Fool. What happened? Mr. Hanged Man seems to be in a very good mood. He's finished digesting his potion. He seems to be anticipating something, Mr. World is still as gloomy and reserved as before, and it's hard to read his thoughts. He really is the nemesis of the spectator pathway. Derek didn't try to hide his anxiety, but he didn't consult the other tarot club members directly. He knew perfectly well that the initial time belonged to Mr. Fool, unless there were no so-called Roselle diary entry. There's no need to rush. The gathering has already begun. If Mr. Fool is in a good mood, he might be able to answer some questions. Derek consoled himself. Alger looked up and humbly said, "Honorable Mr. Fool, P have found 3 new pages of Roselle's diary." Diary? Roselle's diary. Fours pricked up her ears. Klein smiled and replied, "What do you want to exchange them for?" Glancing at the card next to Mr. Fool's hand, Alger suppressed his eagerness and said, "I want to know what that card you have next to you is." Roselle, I know that. Audrey's eyes were half-turned and her chin was slightly raised. She happily cast her gaze diagonally across her, towards a stone pillar that supported the dome. She quickly withdrew her gaze, ready to admire the reaction of Mr. Hanged Man after he heard the answer. Fours vaguely realized one thing. The so-called Roselle's diary can be exchanged with Mr. Fool for answers to certain questions, and maybe even some item. Roselle's diary. Is it referring to the notes that are written with Roselle's unique symbols that no one can interpret? They were actually diary entries. Mr. Hanged Man's tone sounded very firm, and Mr. Fool didn't retort him. I've encountered many, but I've never bought any of them because I wasn't interested. Ah yes, Miss Audrey has quite a few. She's a fanatic when it comes to this. But that dog of hers last week, no, maybe last week. I don't remember it too well. Basically, it tore up many books and notes, including all of the diary entries from Emperor Roselle. The sudden surprise and disappointment that emerged had filled her heart and made her want to raise her hands, cover her ears, and scream. That wasn't enough to express her current feeling. I hate dogs, Fours bitterly thought. The Hanged Man's request was somewhat beyond Klein's expectation. However, it was the easiest for him to complete. He chuckled and said, "Sure. Do you want everyone to hear it, or do you want to be the only one to know it? Alger replied without hesitation, only myself. He didn't have the spirit of selfless devotion to others. Klein laughed and blocked the senses of the other members, which made Miss Justice very upset. She was waiting to see Mr. Hanged Man's stunned and shocked expression, as though she had done something great herself. Although she couldn't proclaim it out loud, she still looked forward to the subsequent reaction after Mr. Hanged Man knew the answer. But now, that detestable Hanged Man has deprived me of this happiness. Audrey grumbled inwardly. Of course, she was very clear that his request was absolutely justified. But I already know the answer, she pursed her lips in thought. At this moment, Klein leisurely flipped over the card of blasphemy and held it vertically, allowing the Hanged Man to directly see the black-armored, crowned, and caped Roselle. It was common to see the portrait of Emperor Roselle, so Alger recognized him immediately. More importantly, there was a clear sign on the card saying, Sequence 0 Dark Emperor. Indeed, it's the rumored deck of cards, which contains the paths of the divine made by Emperor Roselle. It's the original prototype of tarot cards. Sequence O, Dark Emperor, is this the lawyer pathway to becoming divine? Mr. Fool has been collecting Roselle's diary all this time, apparently in order to find clues to this deck of cards, and in a matter of months, he has already acquired one. Alger was surprised and delighted, as well as excited and agitated. All of a sudden, he inexplicably felt that the future of the Tarot Club was incomparably bright. Previously, he had only been intimidated by the mysteriousness and potency of Mr. Fool, and he had only held the notion of using the Tarot Club to exchange information and goods. But now, he began to think of the advantages that he and the other members could reap when Mr. Fool managed to collect all of Emperor Roselle's cards. At that time, the Tarot Club might become the most powerful secret organization. Alger couldn't help but look forward to the future. Then Klein said slowly, a card of blasphemy. He then immediately removed the isolation barrier. As soon as she regained her senses, Justice Audrey immediately turned her gaze towards the Hanged Man. Through the blurred image, she could vaguely read the remaining shock, joy, and yearning from the other party. That's more like it. Audrey was immediately greatly satisfied. A card of blasphemy, indeed. It's related to the blasphemy slate. Alger bowed his head in thought for a few seconds and began to conjure the 3 pages of Roselle's diary. Soon, the 3 yellowish-brown goatskin parchments were in Klein's hand. He casually lowered his gaze and started reading at a moderate pace. 15th March. I really am the protagonist. With just some archaeological clues and folklore, I've found a ghost ship left behind by the Solomon Empire in the Fog Sea's boundary at the Aurek Archipelago, the Dark King. TT's really cool. There are some ancient books on it, including a treasure map pointing to some nameless island. That's the final settlement of a great noble of the Solomon Empire who was defeated and left the northern continent. Everything that he left behind is there. This treasure will definitely belong to me. 19th March. After much deliberation and consideration, I've finally decided to set out on a long voyage. After that, I'll enter the Royal Army as an officer, so it will be hard for me to have an opportunity such as this again. Edwards and Grimm are willing to take the risk and follow me into that foggy sea. Actually, I don't just want the treasures. I also wanted to verify something, from the sun, the red moon, to the trajectory of the stars in the sky, as well as the changes in 4 seasons, all sorts of signs and different data to prove that the world I'm on should be a planet. In that case, it shouldn't only be the northern and southern continents. Based on the various data, the land mass occupied by the 2 continents totaled up isn't even a tenth of the planet's surface area. Could the rest of it be the sea and island? To the west of the northern and southern continent is the Fog Sea. To the east is the Sanya Sea. I suspect that there are other continents at the end of these 2 seas, just like how the southern continent is at the end of the Berserk Sea. Maybe I can find a brand new continent, the western continent. Let's go, great seafarer Roselle Columbus Magellan Gustav. Go and verify your conjecture. The Emperor sure was reckless when he was young. He actually dared to go on a voyage just because he received a treasure map that he had no clue about its authenticity, or if it held any danger. No, he's as rash as he was when he was young, even in his old age. The cards of blasphemy are evidence of this. Klein couldn't help but lampoon. The diary entry seems to be linked to a page or 2 that he had seen before, separated by at most 1 or 2 other diary entries. So Klein was almost certain that Roselle had lost his way in this voyage, and ended up finding a primitive island just outside of the safe sea routes. On it, there were a number of Beyonder creatures. In the process, he had also teased Grimm and Edwards, who were following him to sea, using the memes of the four horsemen of the apocalypse and the Pirate King. In addition, Grimm, who had been praised by Roselle as the smartest of them all, became increasingly stranger after discovering the primitive island, and he ended up dying in the fog sea. Speaking of which, the idea that the world is a planet is now widely accepted and confirmed by astronomy. Klein turned to the second page of the diary. 18th April. I discovered the term Western Continent in an ancient book on the Dark King. There really is a Western Continent. However, even during the fourth epoch in the Solomon Empire, when the gods were still walking the lands, the Western Continent was only a rumor. Legend has it that it was the homeland of the elves, and it was related to the ancient god named Soniath. The problem with that is that the elves ended up on Sonia Island, and later scattered themselves over the mountains and the numerous islands in the seas, and there is no legend that they have ever tried to return to their homeland. In short, the end of the Fog Sea might be the Western Continent, the homeland of the elves. Then, what's at the end of the Sonia Sea? Is there really an Eastern Continent? Where is it hidden in the books of myths? Could it be the ethereal forsaken land of the gods? Proceed onward, Roselle. You're about to reach your destination. The Western Continent, the Eastern Continent. Roselle guessed that the latter might be the forsaken land of the gods. Yes, Mr. Hanged Man once said that many members of the Aurora Order were searching the Sonia Sea for the true Creator's holy residence. And he suspects that the holy residence is the forsaken land of the gods. This is in line with Emperor Roselle's thoughts. This world has many secrets. Klein lowered his gaze towards the last few paragraphs of the page. 20th April. All signs indicate that we're about to reach a continent, not the land from an island. There's actually a benefit to being lost. Could it be that I've discovered the so-called Western Continent? 21st April. I saw the abyss. Abyss. Did Roselle see the abyss in the sense of mysticism? Klein's pupils shrank as he quickly turned the page. But the third page of his diary made him doubt his life and his many years of Chinese education. It was filled with the following sentences. FK hungry please people in manner. Klein realized that this was probably a subsequent forgery of Roselle's diary entry. They had randomly pieced together a bunch of sentences based on the original symbols. At this moment, Klein felt like he was seeing intelligible characters and had the urge to curse those forgers. He wanted to know if the abyss mentioned in Roselle's diary was the abyss to which the terms source of evil, land of corruption, and home of devils referred to. The true abyss is the dark side of the universe where even gods can be corroded. It should be independent from the real world, just like the spirit world. At the very least, this is what the Book of Secrets and the books which I came into contact with during my time with the Nighthawks say. If it's not the true abyss, then what did the Emperor mean by abyss? Klein thought about it over and over again, but was unable to come up with an explanation. He felt extremely dissatisfied, just like when a novel was dropped by the author at the most critical moment. With a single glance, he calmed down and let the diary entries disappear from his hand. You can begin. Sitting at the head of the long bronze table, he chuckled. Alger turned his head immediately towards the sun, asking indifferently, "Have you gotten anything from the former captain of that exploration team?" Sun's story. Derek was originally anxious to ask about the fallen creator, but when he heard the hanged man's question, he answered honestly, "He's dead." "He's dead." Justice, the hanged man, and the magician expressed their surprise at the same time. They really didn't expect this turn of events. After all, the former captain of the exploration team had been locked up for decades without any problems. Who would have thought that he would die right after they discussed about it? At this moment, aside from Mr. Fool, only the gloomy and reserved the world maintained his original state. Derek nodded and said, "Yes. After I returned to the City of Silver, I wanted to glean more information from the former captain using Mr. Hanged Man's suggestions, but he suddenly appeared behind me, asking me if I was looking for him." Upon hearing this, Audrey suddenly drew a short breath. Although the son obviously lacked the ability to tell a good story, his simple description still gave her the feeling of reading horror novels late into the night. It was as if someone was standing behind her, also asking, "Are you looking for me?" Fours was as frightened as she was excited. having found the feeling she had as a child listening to her mother's recount of a ghost story. Despite covering her ears in fear, it felt like someone had possessed her and pried open the gaps between her fingers, allowing the voice to be transmitted into her brain. This passage can be written into a novel. As a best-selling writer, she had outstanding professional instinct. Alger, being experienced and knowledgeable, subconsciously asked, "Doesn't your City of Silver's dungeon have seals targeting rampagers? Is there no barrier between them? I remember that last time you said that there was a very powerful and mysterious item at the core." "Yes, but I don't know how or why he came to my room." He had completely lost control of himself. His head had split open in the middle, and fluid kept flowing out. There were many cracks on his body, and each crack was a mouth, Derek said, describing the scene in passing. "Then how did you survive? How did you escape from his, no, its jaws?" Forrest felt immersed, and it was also a question which Audrey was concerned about. Alger's reaction was very different from theirs. He thoughtfully murmured, "It doesn't make sense to put you, a person who only shows signs of losing control, next to such a dangerous fellow. From the looks of it, the upper echelons of your City of Silver, the members of the six-member council, deliberately made you interact with him, hoping to gather useful information from him and observe any corresponding changes. So which elder saved you?" Derek's mouth gaped a little, feeling as if Mr. Hanged Man had personally seen and heard everything that had happened. Just based on the situation I described, he was able to guess the truth. "How amazing," Derek answered with admiration. "Yes, just as you said, the chief appeared just in time and used the mystical item to deal with the rampager." Noticing the respect and admiration from the son, Alger let out a chuckle. "TT's quite an obvious case. As long as one is experienced enough, you'll easily be able to notice this." "I didn't think of it," Audrey muttered to herself, somewhat depressed. "I couldn't tell." Forrest ran her hand through her hair, ashamed. "I didn't think in that direction," the world repeated Mr. Fool's sigh. After saying that, Alger frowned slightly and slowly asked, "You said that not long after you returned, the former captain of the exploration team lost control." "He didn't lose control for decades, but he suddenly lost control after you returned." At the same time, Mr. Hanged Man raised his head and looked at Mr. Fool. Seeing that Mr. Fool was very calm and without any hint of abnormalities, his mood immediately eased. All the uneasiness he had just now turned into question. "The Ammon family is known as blasphemers. Could it be that that person discovered the Tarot Club and the secret above the gray fog, but he was easily finished off by Mr. Fool?" Derek nodded seriously and said, "I guess 2 reasons. One was because I chose the sun pathway, and you said that the Ammon family was the descendant of an ancient sun god. The other reason is that he noticed that Mr. Fool was pulling me in to attend the gathering, so changes happened to him, and it was proven to be the latter." "How was it proven?" Alger pressed, leaving no stone unturned. "Someone sensed that Mr. Fool was pulling him in to attend the gathering. Someone can really detect it." How terrifying, as expected of a blasphemer, Audrey was astonished and shocked. She couldn't help but glance at the end of the long bronze table, and she was immediately comforted by Mr. Fool's calm and indifferent attitude. "It's just a trivial matter. Mr. Fool, it's just a trivial matter," Audrey thought with joy and relief. So it turns out that someone is able to discover the Tarot Club's gathering. As expected, with so many pathways and so many sequences, there would always be a beyonder power that can detect this. But for me right now, this is a very bad thing. I'm still too weak. I have to advance my sequence as soon as possible." Forrest was momentarily surprised and frightened. Derek truthfully described the events. "I saw Ammon's shadow when the rampager was finished off by the chief. It should be him. This is what he looks like." With the approval of Mr. Fool, Derek conjured a light screen depicting Ammon. A black classic robe, a matching pointed hat, a crystal monocle, a broad forehead, a thin face, black eyes, black curly hair. "Have any of you seen him before?" Derek asked hopefully. Hanged Man, Justice, the magician, and the world shook their heads in unison. Without harping on the matter, Derek continued. "Ammon's shadow was eliminated by the chief with the help of the mystical item, leaving being a translucent worm. The chief told me that it was only an avatar of Ammon. He explained to me the reason for arranging it, so I lived beside him. After confirming that I was fine, he allowed me to return home. I was a little afraid, unaware of any subsequent actions Ammon might take. Therefore, the moment I reached home, I prayed to Mr. Fool." "Wait," Alger interrupted the son with a frown. You said that you just experienced such a strange and terrifying incident, and the chief let you go home just like that. And the moment you returned home, you didn't do anything but first pray to Mr. Fool. Yes, Derek answered blankly. What's wrong with that? He found Mr. Hanged Man's attitude rather odd. Audrey vaguely felt that what the son had done wasn't right, but she couldn't immediately figure out what was wrong. She just believed that if she were in his shoes, she definitely wouldn't have done that. But at that very moment, Fours had already covered her face. Too careless, I was like that in the past, and the price of that was to use up a stone on my bracelet and start bearing the curse of the full moon. The best-selling writer sighed in her heart. Alger glanced at Mr. Fool again. Seeing that he remained indifferent, he forced himself to relax. He held his fist against his nose and said, after having such an interaction with that strange Ammon, do you think the chief will just do a cursory inspection and be completely reassured about you? TF, that's really the case. That former captain of the exploratory team wouldn't have been imprisoned for 42 years. In my experience, the chief has definitely sent someone to secretly monitor you, and you've undoubtedly exposed your own uniqueness. Don't doubt this. If the chief isn't that careful, then there's no way your city of silver can last till this day under such abject environments. Derek's eyes widened, being even more convinced that Mr. Hanged Man was truly knowledgeable, and that what he said made a lot of sense. The chief discovered something abnormal about me. So that's why he had such an attitude when he heard my report. What should I do? What should I do? Derek immediately became nervous and frightened. Noticing his concern, Alger scoffed. However, you don't have to worry about it for now. I just thought about it. Even if your City of Silver's chief found out about your abnormality, he would only suspect that you were possessed by Ammon, that you've been contaminated by him, and wouldn't think of the Tarot Club. You still have time, so you can slowly think of a way to resolve this problem. Derek calmed down a little and honestly said, back then, I really was possessed by Ammon. What? Alger blurted out. He nearly left his seat, taking on a combat stance to fend off any accidents. Audrey and Fours immediately tensed up. Only the gloomy world showed mere surprise. Startled by the reaction of Mr. Hanged Man, Derek quickly added, Mr. Fool discovered it while I was praying. As he spoke, he conjured the scene which Mr. Fool had sent to him back then. Dressed in a pointed hat and a crystal monocle, Ammon's illusory figure was coiled around his spirit body like the ghost of a python. Seeing Justice and Magician trembling from the bottom of their hearts, the Hanged Man immediately pressed on. What happened next? Later, Mr. Fool taught me a ritual. Through the ritual, he sent his angel to purify Ammon's avatar, Derek replied without embellishing or simplifying anything. Angel? Hanged Man looked in shock at the end of the bronze table. He hurriedly lowered his head when he realized that his actions were impulsive and impolite. Angel? Audrey was momentarily left dazed. After a brief moment of blankness, Audrey quickly understood what the son was saying. He was saying that Mr. Fool had sent his angel to purify Ammon's avatar. Angel? Mr. Fool sent an angel. Mr. Fool really has an angel as an attendant. Every angel has at least the power of a sequence too. Although that's expected and I've already expected it, it's still amazing because it has finally been verified. And only deities can control angels. Audrey's eyes shone with excitement. She couldn't help but wonder what Mr. Fool's angel looked like. I wonder if I'll be lucky enough to see that. She looked towards the end of the long bronze table with admiration and zeal. At the same time, her spiritual perception told her that Mr. World, who was always gloomy, had also sat up straight in shock, which pleased her inexplicably. Fours recalled what had happened to her previously. She had only asked Mr. Fool to interfere with any divinations, and she ended up seeing a 12-winged archangel descend, enveloping her spirit body with its wing. It really was an angel black wings, an archangel with 12 pairs of wings, and this really is just a routine procedure for Mr. Fool. He would send an angel to help members of the gathering get out of trouble, for suddenly didn't dare to look up at the gentleman who was sitting leisurely at the end of the long bronze table. Although she was still only sequence 9, and she hadn't received a complete education in the field of mysticism, she had been involved with different Beyonder circles for 3 years. She would have learned of certain things even if she didn't deliberately find out about them. In the midst of all of this, there was a very important clause: you may not look directly at God. In the past, this sentence didn't leave much of an impression on Fours, but now she suddenly felt that it was the truth derived from countless bloody lessons. Angel? Mr. Fool really does have an angel by his side. The hanged man felt a wave of fear and baffling excitement hit him, causing his body to tremble slightly. Previously, when he told us his honorific name and responded to prayers and rituals, this had indirectly expressed the notion that Mr. Fool was equivalent to a god. However, direct evidence was still lacking. But now an angel has appeared. The existence of that alone is enough to explain many things. Amongst them, the most important thing is that angels represent the most direct form of deterrence. Mr. Fool is not without influence in the real world. Even if he doesn't go through his adorers, he can still project his majesty onto a certain region. Alger immediately thought of many things. He broke into a cold sweat for his shallow actions in the past, while feeling filled with hope for the future. Immediately following that, he started to think about the details of what the sun had said. Mr. Fool didn't let the angel descend directly. Instead, he taught the sun a ritual. Through that ritual, he sent the angel to purify Ammon's avatar. That's quite a roundabout way of doing things. Does this mean that in order to influence the real world, Mr. Fool must break through many obstacles? This is consistent with my earlier judgment that he is in a sealed and confined state, or perhaps there's something special about the forsaken land of the god. The reason why Mr. Fool didn't act like this before was because he has escaped a little. He is gradually freeing himself. Sitting at Mr. Fool's seat, Klein slowly looked around. He was obviously aware of Miss Justice's reverence and zeal, as well as the fear and excitement of the hanged man. Weren't you always treating me like a god in the past? Why are you acting like this after hearing about the angel? It seems like indirect evidence ultimately cannot be compared to the shock and awe delivered by direct evidence. If a new member were to question me in the future, I would make preparations in advance for the world to step forward and say something. Then I would casually point my finger and kill him as an example to others. Once things calmed down, I would make anew the world. Klein's thoughts gradually wandered. Derek didn't quite understand the reactions of Mr. Hanged Man and Miss Justice. From his point of view, wasn't it normal that an angel served a god or a mighty existence? After pondering for a few seconds, he said, "After Ammon's avatar was purified, I coughed out a worm that was exactly identical to the one in the dungeon. Do you know what it is?" With the help of Klein's help, the sun successfully conjured a projection of a translucent worm with 12 transparent rings. Audrey and Fours looked over curiously. At the same time, they shook their heads, indicating that they had never seen or heard of this kind of worm. 12 rings, in the Book of Secrets, all similar symbols have something to do with time. The Ammon family was descended from an ancient sun god, and in ancient times, people believed that the sun and time were related. This can barely be considered an explanation and can be verified from two angles, however. Why is it that the current eternal blazing sun is the inextinguishable light, embodiment of order, god of deeds, and guardian of businesses? But he doesn't seem to be involved in the domain that deals with time. In order to maintain his image as the fool, Klein was in no hurry to answer. He smiled, his gaze warm. Alger thought for a moment before saying, "It should be the vessel that Ammon created for his avatar. In legends, there is a type of worm that looks similar appearance-wise. They have 12 transparent rings and are called worms of time. However, no one has ever seen them before. Many people suspect that it's actually the name of a sequence potion. Worm of time, so it's very close to my guess. Although this is just a legend spread among Beyonders at the middle echelons of particular churches and above, the information itself is of great value." Is Mr. Hanged Man saying this out loud to let others know this because he has been rewarded, having learned a lot of important information from the sun? Klein felt wistful and amused at the same time. Worm of time, the vessel that Ammon created for his avatar. Derek whispered to himself, as though he had resolved many of his doubts. He curiously asked, "What can it be used for?" "I mean when it's dead." "T don't know." Faced with the sun's trust and respectful gaze, Alger suddenly felt a little ashamed. At that moment, the fool, who was sitting at the very end of the long bronze table, spoke calmly, "The main material of certain rituals." This was what Klein had surmised from the contents of the Book of Secrets. However, he wasn't worried that he would say anything wrong, because it was almost impossible to prove it. Failing to find the ritual that requires a worm of time just serves to prove that you're not knowledgeable enough. Klein casually added inwardly, certain rituals, Audrey and the others instantly let their imaginations run wild. "Thank you, the great Mr. Fool." Derek got up halfway and bowed. Following that, the topic steered towards the matter that threatened the existence of the City of Silver. "The exploratory team is back." I'm referring to the team led by Shepherd Elder Lovey. "They completed the exploration of the fallen creator's half-destroyed temple and have returned to the City of Silver. And I discovered that a few of the team members that I know have undergone a certain degree of change. They've been corrupted by the true creator." Alger didn't hesitate to point that out with a tone of certainty. The true creator. Audrey couldn't help but look at the end of the bronze table. She remembered very clearly that the true creator had once had its descent foiled by Mr. Fool's Adore. She had even guessed that the leader of their tarot club was going to be the nemesis of evil gods. "Really?" Derek returned, refusing to believe it. The hanged man calmly said, "Describe their changes in detail." "He still feel like he's the same person, but he's very different from before. His original optimism has now turned heavy. There's only a polite smile left from his former bright smile." Derek shared everything abnormal that he had discovered, including the sudden improvement in Shepherd Elder Lovey's state. Alger said in deliberation, "The situation might be worse than you think. Corruption could be the best possibility. Now, if they truly believe from the bottom of their hearts in the true fallen creator, that would be trouble, and they would be irredeemable. Regardless, their characters, thoughts, and viewpoints would all be warped, turning into hidden lunatics. You can take action from this angle, letting other members of the six-member council notice that something is amiss. Have already reported the matter, but the chief doesn't seem to trust me too much," Derek said in a slightly aggrieved and heavy manner. Fours couldn't help but sigh. "That's because your chief is suspecting that you're possessed by Ammon and planning something nefarious against the City of Silver." "Then what should I do? Even if I tell them of the existence of the fallen creator, they wouldn't believe me, am I right?" Derek asked anxiously. The hanged man pondered for 2 seconds before saying, "In truth, your chief should have begun paying attention to the shepherd and the exploratory team member. For your City of Silver to survive to this day, the upper echelons will definitely have the most basic level of vigilance and not neglect any possible threats. The only problem is that the importance they place on this matter is definitely insufficient. At the very least, it's not as important as their attention on you and Ammon." Without waiting for the son to speak, he added after some deliberation, "Perhaps you can use this incident to wipe away the suspicion on you. Find an opportunity to make a particular exploratory team member to show the most thorough extent of an abnormality and enter into a conflict with him. That way, the other members of the six-member council will notice that something isn't right and raise the priority on this matter. At the same time, hand over the suspected worm of time and say that you suddenly felt your mind be adrift while the conflict was happening and that you had no idea what happened. You only vaguely heard someone shouting 'True Creator' before you woke up. And by then, you had already coughed out that worm. When an evil god is involved, there are many means and abilities that one wouldn't dare use without thought. Your chief would adhere to logic and guess that Ammon's avatar and the mental corruption left behind by the true creator had entered into conflict, eventually being destroyed and reduced to a dead worm. Surveillance on you would definitely decline significantly. If you act normally for an additional period of time, then the suspicion placed on you would be completely gone." "Why does Mr. Hanged Man seem so well versed in this aspect?" Audrey thought with her mouth slightly open. Derek's eyes lit up when he heard this, and he felt that Mr. Hanged Man was indeed trustworthy. He had come up with such a good idea. "Then, how do I make that exploratory team member display the most thorough extent of his abnormality?" he quickly asked. Alger fell silent for a few seconds before saying, "I don't know." He then added, "It would be great if there are items related to the true creator." With a whoosh, Audrey looked towards the fool who was seated at the end of the long bronze table. World Klein knew very well why Miss Justice was looking at him. Being aware of the Lanevis incident, she was certain that he had many conflicts, both in the open and in the shadows, between himself and the true creator, and that it was normal for him to have the corresponding items, perhaps even quite a few of them, in his possession. Logically speaking, there's nothing wrong with her thinking. In fact, I have crossed the true creator several times, and I do have an item that fits those descriptions. Klein sighed inwardly. There was no question about helping little son. There were many monsters in the forsaken land of the gods, where the City of Silver was located, allowing the collection of several materials which were rare in the northern and southern continents. In addition, they had a contiguous history that wasn't distorted by any of the deities or churches. They gave the most objective stories and secrets prior to the cataclysm, and the knowledge involved was extremely valuable. Whether it was from the perspective of the Tarot Club's leader, or simply considering his own interests, Klein had no intention of giving up Little Sun or the City of Silver unless it was hopeless. However, there were certain things which weren't suitable for Mr. Fool to voice out. Just as Audrey was looking expectantly at Mr. Fool, who was shrouded in a thick gray fog, the world, who had been silent all this time, finally opened his mouth. "T have an item that contains the mental corruption of the true creator." It was referring to the all-black eye that Nimblewright Master Risego had left behind. An item containing the mental corruption of the true creator. Alger thought as he organized his words. This might be able to help the Sun. Once those exploratory team members, whose thoughts and viewpoints have been warped, sense the mental imprint of the true creator, there's a high possibility that they will mutate right on the spot. The world looked at the Sun and laughed hoarsely. "Kid, I can lend you that item, but what will you be using to pay for it?" Having seen hope, Derek's mind raced, suddenly remembering what had happened during previous gatherings, and quickly said, "I can help you find the characteristics of the human skin shadow, the mutated pituitary gland and blood of a thousand-faced hunter. I can also attempt to obtain the method to removing the mental corruption on an item left behind by a rampager. Whichever I get first will be used as payment." Out of all of the options, the human skin shadow was relatively easy to encounter. It was one of the scarier monsters in the depths of the darkness. At this moment, Derek wasn't considering whether the exchange was of equal value or not. Even though a one-time loan of an item contaminated by the true creator was obviously not worth as much as the conditions he put forward, under the current circumstances, he could grit his teeth and accept whatever high price the world offered. Thus, he might as well proactively show his sincerity. The world nodded slightly. "Very good, I will ask for Mr. Fool's help to lend it to you." As he spoke, he revealed the shape of the all-black eye and added, "TT's the equivalent of a sequence 5 bayon. If you lose it, you'll have to provide me with compensation. Also, as soon as this is over, return it to me." This was what Klein couldn't say in his capacity as the Fool. If a god-level existence like him kept harping about compensation and remember to return it to me, then the status he had built up for himself would have collapsed. In addition, Klein took into account the hidden dangers that lay in the future. The all-black eye and the other items were all things that he had used in the real world. If he were to bring in a new member who knew of this matter, they could confirm certain matters based on this point. Therefore, allowing Sherlock Moriarty to be equivalent to the world was clearly better than having Sherlock Moriarty be equivalent to the Fool. When your strength doesn't match your status, all I can do is tremble in fear, as if I were treading on thin ice or facing the abyss. Klein sighed silently. Seeing that Mr. Fool hadn't refused the world's request, nor did he point out any problems with the deal, Derek was relieved and quickly agreed to all the demands. At the same time, Audrey was genuinely happy for Little Sun. Alger thought for a while before letting out a sigh. He then said to the Sun in a measured tone, "Don't be too optimistic. How to seize this opportunity still needs to be organized. First, you have to choose a time, and without putting yourself in danger, have only one exploratory team member be present while there are several City of Silver citizens, or when they're all in a quarantined and sealed state. You have to use a wall of spirituality to seal the vessel that stores the corrupted item ahead of time, and not allow anyone to notice it. By doing that, you can control the development of the situation. In addition, you need to consider how to hide that item after it's over. You mustn't let the 6-member council discover it, otherwise, you'll never be able to clear the suspicion on you. If such an easily deceived fellow were to die, it would be difficult for me to obtain any more information regarding the forsaken land of the gods or the secrets of the ancient era. The hanged man didn't find it problematic to offer help. Under his tutelage, Derek gradually had a complete plan and a few key points to take note of. "Thank you, Mr. Hanged Man. Thank you to all of you." He sincerely expressed his gratitude to every member in the gathering. This made Audrey feel the satisfaction of doing a good deed. The matter of the Sun came to an end at this point, and Fours, who had witnessed it all, suddenly had an idea. She ruffled her slightly curled long hair and said, "I wish to know which family the apprentice pathway belongs to." I'm willing to use one of the chapters in the sites in the spirit world as a barter. Although the content is considered the ravings of a dreamer, many of the things described in it are true from my experiences into the spirit world. The Sights in the Spirit World was one of the mysticism notebooks that Mrs. Allisa had left her. The logic of the content was incoherent, absurd, and just reading it alone left one irritable. However, when her body entered and left the spirit world 3 times for a variety of reasons, Forrest discovered that the records in the notebook might not necessarily just be raving. Sights in the Spirit World. Klein leaned back slightly as he controlled the world to answer before the Hanged Man. He know the answer, and I can give you some of the corresponding information for free. He knew very well that the Hanged Man could also answer the magician's question. It's bad to have competition. That's why you need to combine it with free gifts, Klein silently lampooned. All right. Forrest felt a surge of joy. She discovered that the Tarot Club really was much more high-end than the other Beyonder circles that she had participated in before. Many difficult questions could be answered here. At this moment, the world asked in a low voice, "Do you want to hear the answer for yourself or have everyone else hear it too?" Forrest pondered for a few seconds, then caught Audrey and the others by surprise with her answer. Just say it out here. In her opinion, the answers to her own questions were of little help to others, and it didn't matter if they found out. And if Mr. World had left something out or gave an incomplete description, and someone else happened to know the corresponding content, then she would be able to use the same sites in the Spirit World chapter to obtain the full picture. She believed that it was more important that way. The world wasn't surprised and said in a low and hoarse voice, "In the 4th epoch, the apprentice pathway was wielded by the Abraham family. Later, it was spread to the Tamara family, which had been in marriage alliances with it for extended periods of time. In the 5th epoch, which is the present epoch, the Theosophy order also has the apprentice and trickmaster potion formula. They're widely believed to be related to the Abraham and Tamara families. Of course, there are also people who suspect that the Theosophy order is actually a guise of the demoness sect. Considering that Miss Magician had already met with members of the Abraham family, Klein added via the world, "It is said that the Abraham family has suffered a bloodline curse all this time. They have no choice but to take up residence separately from each other in order to avoid danger." Bloodline curse. For's eyes widened as she thought of her encounter. Mrs. Allis's husband belonged to the Abraham family, and that Mr. Lawrence is also a part of the Abraham family. Is that why she said that as long as one isn't a member of the family clan, they wouldn't suffer the curse? However, I used the bracelet, and it belongs to the Abraham family. Once again, regret gnawed at her soul. This was the first time that Alger and Audrey was hearing about the bloodline curse of the Abraham family. Both of them had their own thoughts, so no one spoke up for a short period of time. After a while, Forrest took a deep breath and said, "Thank you, Mr. World. You have answered the biggest question I have. T will copy the first chapter of the Sights in the Spirit World after the end of this gathering and sacrifice it to Mr. Fool. Is that okay, Mr. Fool?" The magician is a descendant of the Abraham family. It's no wonder her body can enter and exit the spirit world. She likely possesses a corresponding mystical item. The Hanged Man suddenly looked at her. Forrest is a member of the Abraham family. She was born in an ancient family dating back to the 4th epoch. Audrey nodded as if she was thinking about something. After receiving a positive reply from Mr. Fool, Forrest relaxed and began mentioning her desire to buy the Beyonder ingredients, stomach pouch of a spirit eater and the blood of a deep-sea marlin. Unfortunately, the sun wasn't going out during this period of time, so there was nothing. As for the Hanged Man, he merely mentioned that he had clues to the deep-sea marlin's blood. No one had obtained the formula for the wind-blessed potion yet. On the other hand, Audrey wasn't in a hurry to purchase the psychiatrist's formula because she was about to join the psychology alchemist. Klein originally wanted to sell either the werewolf Beyonder characteristic or biological poison bottle, but after considering the latter's compatibility with his spirit body state and the current financial situation of the members, he temporarily gave up on that idea. The transaction segment quickly ended, and the gathering reached the stage where each of them could share information they had heard about. Audrey slowly looked around and said with a slight smile, "Last week, an interesting case happened in Backland. The protagonist is called the Hero Bandit Dark Emperor. Beyonder characteristics Dark Emperor. The hanged man, who was casually listening to Miss Justice, suddenly raised his head. His gaze suddenly became sharp and piercing. He had just learned that the card in Mr. Fool's hand was one of the cards of blasphemy created by Emperor Roselle. The name of the card was Dark Emperor. Does this have to do with Mr. Fool? Alger quickly glanced at the end of the long bronze table before immediately lowering his head. If it was really done by Mr. Fool's adorer, this definitely isn't a simple matter. Alger listened attentively to Miss Justice's subsequent description. Fours, who had long since learned of this from Zio and had some predictions about it, also gave the fool a glance. She wanted to see the truth from the concealed entity's reaction, but the fool remained as calm as ever in the thick gray fog. Audrey, who wasn't able to glean anything either, paused for a moment, then continued. The victim is a tycoon, Captain. Many rumors point to him being the biggest human trafficker in Backland. Hero bandit Dark Emperor infiltrated his villa and robbed him of his life, rescuing many innocent girls who were locked up in his underground dungeon. When Capim's corpse was discovered, it was covered with a deck of tarot cards. His face was covered with the cards, Judgment and the Emperor. She didn't mention the safe as she found it unimportant. Covered with tarot cards. Is that the symbol for when our tarot club takes action? Wait a minute, a human trafficker. Alger sharply noticed a phrase. He turned to the end of the long bronze table and humbly asked, Mr. Fool, is Capim related to the disappearance of the colonial slaves? The latter was a mission had been assigned to him by the Church of the Lord of Storms, and he had formerly targeted a suspect named Balin and had asked Backland residents, Justice, the Magician, and the world to keep an eye out for him. As a result, upon hearing the word human trafficker, Alger intuitively believed that it had something to do with the disappearance of many tribes on the southern continent and the flight of many slaves from many islands in the Sanya Sea. He felt that only a matter such as this, which seemed to hold some secrets, could interest Mr. Fool. Of course, it cannot be ruled out that it was an independent act by Mr. Fool's adorer. He couldn't possibly be waiting for everything to be arranged like a manipulated puppet, Alger thought. Capim has something to do with the recent disappearance of the colonial slave. On second thought, that's not a possibility that can be eliminated. There were 4 Beyonders in his villa, and that in itself isn't normal in the first place. Even if a tycoon like him were to hire Beyonder bodyguards, then he would only be able to get a sequence 7 and 2 sequences 8s or 9s at most. Back then, Harris, together with his mystical items, was equivalent to sequence 5 expert. The hanged man's words jolted Klein's thoughts as he felt that the matter could vaguely be linked together. However, he wasn't sure about his theory, and he could only disregard the hanged man's question. He chuckled and said, My adorer made some minor contributions in this matter. As expected. Audrey's eyes shone brightly as she cheered in her heart. As expected, it's the first time that I encountered anything to do with the Tarot Club in real life. Fours was half happy and half wistful. Alger believed that Mr. Fool's words were an indirect confirmation of his conjecture. Capim was definitely not a simple human trafficker. Otherwise, he wouldn't have caused a hidden existence's adorer to take action. Therefore, there was a strong correlation between the human trafficking and the disappearance of the slaves. Both were matters that weren't simple. Without waiting for Miss Justice to speak, Klein lightly tapped his finger on the edge of the ancient long table and leisurely added, He obtained 2 Beyonder characteristics from this matter and wishes to sell them as quickly as possible. The 2 characteristics correspond to sequence 8 Sheriff, and the other is sequence 7 Interrogator. Sheriff, Interrogator, aren't those from the Arbiter pathway which is controlled by the Augustus family. Only members of the royal family, ancient nobles, and the military could possibly acquire them. Capim had one of them backing him. Not excluding the possibility of the Fainapotter Kingdom's Castia family, Alger frowned, feeling that the disappearance of the slaves wasn't as simple as it seemed. Audrey's thoughts were similar to his. She had never thought that the Beyonders at Capim's villa would be from the Arbiter pathway. It's impossible that the faction in control of the corresponding formulas would collude with a human trafficker like Capim. Audrey pursed her lips slightly, puzzled and confused. Sheriff. Fours, who knew that her good friend Zio was saving up for the potion ingredients for this sequence, sat up hurriedly and asked in puzzlement, Mr. Fool, what are Beyonder characteristics? That's not what I expected. Shouldn't you directly ask me how much it is? That's right, I don't think I've ever told Miss Magician about the law of Beyonder characteristics indestructibility and conservation. Klein was taken aback for a moment, and then he began to consider his tone. And at that moment, Audrey spoke out on his behalf. "Mr. Fool, may I answer the question? The corresponding payment shall be paid directly to you." She and Fours are friends, and she had volunteered out of the fear that Mr. Fool wouldn't share that knowledge again. "No problem." Klein smiled in response. "Miss Justice is always able to worry about the things that trouble me." He sighed with emotion inwardly. "Phew." Audrey breathed a silent sigh of relief and turned to face Four. She deliberately didn't use the pronunciation and unique vocabulary of a noble to say, "Do you want to know the answer? What are you willing to pay?" Fours nodded without hesitation. "Of course." She looked at the figure shrouded in gray fog and respectfully asked, "Mr. Fool, can I use another chapter of the sights in the spirit world as payment?" She specifically emphasized another, because she knew that the chapter she would give to Mr. World would be first sacrificed to Mr. Fool, and the knowledge that could be viewed at any time didn't seem to have any value for a transaction. It wasn't to say that she suspected that a mighty figure like Mr. Fool would peak. He just felt that it was more sincere to change the chapter. Sometimes, a mighty figure only cares about your attitude. Fours had read such things in many novels. Leaning back in his chair, Klein replied in an unconcerned tone, "Sure." "Thank you, Mr. Fool," Fours said, unable to suppress her smile. She instinctively believed that she had come into contact with certain secret high-level knowledge. Audrey was completely relieved as she smiled faint. "In the Bay Underworld, there is a law. Remember, it's a law. In similar pathways, the total Bayonder characteristics are conserved, never reducing or increasing. It will only move from one entity to another, changing from one form to another. Therefore, after the death of a Bayonder, their characteristics will be separated and become equivalent to the main ingredient of a potion. Oh, apart from the remains of rampagers. There are too many latent troubles with those, so they can only be made into items. After the death of a Bayonder, their characteristics will be separated and become equivalent to the main ingredient of a potion." In that instance, it was as if lightning flashed through Four's mind, allowing her to understand many things. "It turns out that the remains Mrs. Allisa left me was her Bayonder characteristic. It turns out that in the eyes of others, every Bayonder is equivalent to walking ingredients. That's really dark." Fours clenched her fists tightly, feeling that the Bayonder world was essentially filled with madness. However, she didn't feel disgusted by the fact that she had become a Bayonder, because she had consumed the Bayonder characteristics left behind by Mrs. Allisa. Instead, it gave her a faint sense of warmth. After losing her mother, before she met Zio, Mrs. Allisa was the person who treated her the best. For Fours, it was a sad but warm experience for her to inherit Mrs. Allisa's remains and be with her forever. So that's the case. The law of Bayonder characteristics indestructibility and conservation. That means the characteristic left behind by a Sheriff Bayonder is equivalent to all the main ingredients. Or was asked an additional question to verify her thoughts. "Yes." Audrey also thought of Zio. Fours immediately stood up and bowed to the mysterious existence that was looking down at everything. "Mr. Fool, can you get your Adora to reserve the Sheriff's corresponding Bayonder characteristic? I wish to buy it, but I temporarily lack the funds. Please give me another week, is that fine?" "Sure." Klein took on an attitude as though he didn't care. Fours heaved a sigh of relief and quickly asked, "How much does your Adora wish to receive in gold pound?" "The price of a corresponding sequence 8 Bayonder ingredient is around 300 pounds, Klein smiled. 600 pounds. After naming the price, he immediately switched topics, showing that he didn't care about a sequence 8 Bayonder characteristic. He looked around and conjured a few goatskin parchments. "This is the meaning of a portion of Roselle's secret symbol. It's considered free knowledge, making it easier for you to collect the diary entries in the future." The information included numbers and dates. The reason why Klein had taught the members of the Tarot Club this information was that he was afraid that they would later end up buying counterfeits. With the knowledge of dates, they'll be able to eliminate most counterfeits. Klein chuckled inwardly. Audrey and the others were pleasantly surprised, never expecting to gain such knowledge. Although they had already discovered that the secret symbols on the goatskin were the simplest ones, they all believed that this was a good start. With the first time, there would be a second time and a third time. After a short exchange, Klein said in a gentle tone, "Let us end today's gathering here." "By your will." Audrey Alger and the others stood up at the same time and bowed. The crimson rays of light dissipated, and the ancient palace above the gray fog returned to its former tranquility. Only Klein was left sitting alone on the high-backed chair belonging to the fool.